89 AD, Arena of Capua. A gladiator has just killed 3 opponents. The crowd roars. The emperor applauds. And as a reward, they give him something that wasn't gold or freedom. They give him a woman, a Dacian prisoner, chained, terrified, dragged to the underground chambers of the amphitheatre. This wasn't a crime. It was a rite, a tradition. The official reward Rome gave its champions. Welcome to the carnal victory system of the Roman Empire. This isn't fiction, it's documented. The poet Juvenal wrote about it in his Satire 6. The historian Suetonius recorded it in his Imperial Chronicles. Martial described it in his epigrams without censoring a single word. Rome, laws, aqueducts, philosophy, and this, women turned into human trophies for warriors covered in blood. Today you're going to discover what Roman historians really wrote about what gladiators did with female prisoners after victory. The practices Hollywood never shows, that your teachers never mentioned, but that Rome documented in detail. Not warriors and honor, not epic battles, but underground chambers beneath the sands, prisoners dragged like trophies, and an empire that called this justice. Hollywood made Gladiator, but they forgot to tell you this part. I'm Crown and Dagger, and this is what really happened. Why does everyone know Maximus Decimus Meridius, but nobody knows what happened after the applause ended? Because books prefer myth over horror. Every week we unearth what they tried to erase. If you want history without filters, subscribe, because what comes now will change how you see the Colosseum forever. Imagine being another man's property. They lock you in barracks called a ludus. They train you to kill. And if you survive, if you manage to make 50,000 people scream your name, you receive a prize. Rome, 1st to 3rd century AD. More than 250 arenas operating simultaneously across the empire. Gladiators weren't romantic heroes. They were slaves, criminals, prisoners of war. And legally, they weren't complete persons. When a gladiator won, the editor, the game's organizer, offered him options: money, wine, a clean bed for one night, or Victoria Carnalis. Suetonius documents it in The Lives of the 12 Caesars. Tacitus mentions it in his annals. Cassius Dio records it without censorship. Victoria Carnalis meant access to the captive, female prisoners of war, Dacian women, Gauls, Britons, Germans, captured during Roman conquests. No rights, no legal protection, no way to refuse. They weren't prostitutes. They were human spoils, property of the Roman state, and handing them over as prizes didn't cost a denarius from the imperial treasury. This wasn't casual perversion, it was social engineering. First, gladiators risked their lives entertaining the empire. Rewarding them without spending gold was efficient. Second, publicly humiliating women from conquered peoples sent a message. Look what Rome can do. Not even your women are safe. The philosopher Seneca attended these games and wrote something that will chill your blood. I come home more greedy, more cruel, more inhuman, because I have been among humans. Rome had turned brutality into routine, horror into bureaucracy, suffering into entertainment, and everything was documented, recorded, archived. Now that you understand how the system worked, let me show you what Juvenal and Martial really wrote about what happened in those chambers, what they saw with their own eyes, and what they recorded without censoring a word. Here's what the poets witnessed. After a victorious combat, the master of games would descend into the hypodium, the underground labyrinth beneath the arena. According to Suetonius, the gladiator was presented with a bronze tablet listing available rewards. If he chose Victoria Carnalis, he was granted first selection of the captive. Martial describes this in Epigram 968. He writes about victorious fighters being led through holding cells where female prisoners were kept. Some still wore torn clothing from their capture. Others had been prepared by attendants, washed, hair untangled, made presentable. The gladiator would point. Guards would unlock chains. the woman would be taken to what Roman administrative records coldly called reward chambers. These weren't improvised spaces. Archaeological evidence from multiple Roman amphitheatres shows small rooms with stone benches, iron rings set into walls, and doors that locked from the outside. They were purpose-built, part of the arena's architecture, as planned as the tunnels for lions or the elevators for gladiators. Juvenal, in his biting Satire 6, mocks the practice, but confirms its existence. He writes about women allocated as prizes to blood-soaked champions, describing it as routine as distributing money or wine. The selection wasn't random, it was bureaucratic, organised. A clerk would record each transaction in official ledgers. One Dacian female, approximately 20 years, transferred to gladiator Gaius for Victoria Carnalis reward. Human beings reduced to inventory items. But this system served a purpose beyond rewarding fighters. It was psychological warfare. Tacitus, in his Annals, describes Rome's strategy with conquered peoples. It wasn't enough to defeat them militarily. Rome needed to break their spirit completely. How do you destroy a people's will to resist? You take their daughters, their wives, their priestesses, the women they fought to protect, and you give them to slaves as entertainment. Cassius Dio records that after Trajan's conquest of Dacia in 106 AD, thousands of Dacian prisoners were brought to Rome. Among them were women from the tribal aristocracy, daughters of chieftains, wives of warriors. These weren't common peasants, they were the protected class of their society, and Rome deliberately used them as gladiator rewards during the victory celebrations. When Trajan celebrated with 123 days of games, the message to every conquered nation was clear. This is what happens when you resist Rome. Your men die in our arenas. Your women become our property. Resistance is worse than surrender. Suetonius mentions this practice during multiple imperial celebrations. After military victories, the influx of female captives created a surplus that arena managers used as cost-free rewards. It was strategic, calculated, and completely legal under Roman law. The poet Martial witnessed one such distribution and wrote, "The victor takes his prize as Rome takes its tributes, by right of conquest, without mercy, without shame." He wasn't condemning it, he was stating fact. Because in the Roman mind, this was justice. The conquered existed for the pleasure of the conqueror. That was the natural order, refined over centuries. What makes this even more chilling is how organized it was. This wasn't chaos, it was administration. Roman records show that arena managers kept detailed inventories of captivae available for rewards. Age, origin, physical condition, all documented. Suetonius describes the role of the procurator munerum, the games administrator, who oversaw everything from lion procurement to prisoner allocation. These officials worked with military commanders who supplied captured women from conquest zones: Gaul, Germania, Britannia, Dacia. Each military campaign fed the arena's needs. The logistical chain was impressive. Women captured on battlefields in modern-day Romania or Germany would be transported across the empire, processed through military camps, catalogued, and eventually delivered to arena holding facilities. Cassius Dio mentions supply shortages during years without major military campaigns. When conquests slowed, the availability of captivae decreased, forcing arena managers to offer more traditional rewards, like money. Think about that. The empire's entertainment infrastructure depended on a steady supply of conquered women. Juvenal sarcastically notes in Satire 6 that some gladiators preferred Victoria Carnalis over cash payments because gold runs out, but Rome's enemies are infinite. The chambers where this occurred were maintained by arena staff. Tacitus mentions attendants responsible for preparing these spaces, cleaning, lighting torches, ensuring privacy. Privacy not for dignity, but for the fiction that this was somehow separate from the public spectacle above. Guards were posted outside, not to protect the women, they had no rights, but to prevent unauthorized access. The reward was exclusive to the designated gladiator. Administrative tablets from Pompeii and other sites show standardized forms for these transactions. One partially preserved document reads, "Hereby granted to gladiator name for meritorious victory, choice of captiva, Gallic origin, duration not to exceed 1 night, to be returned to holding by dawn." Returned. Like borrowed equipment, human suffering processed with the efficiency of a grain shipment. Pause for a second and think about this. We've just covered how Rome turned sexual violence into rewards, humiliation into policy, and suffering into bureaucracy. And if you think this is the darkest part of the story, you're wrong. Because what comes next shows how Rome made its own citizens complicit, how silence became survival, and how an entire empire convinced itself this was normal. Here's where it gets truly disturbing. This system required more than just gladiators and prisoners. It required everyone else to look away. Seneca, that philosopher who confessed the games made him more cruel, also wrote something else in his letters to Lucilius. He describes sitting among Roman citizens, fathers with their sons, mothers with daughters, watching these spectacles, and nobody objected, nobody protested. Why? Because Roman society had normalized this through a concept called dignitas, social honor. To publicly object to imperial practices meant questioning Rome's right to rule. Questioning Rome's right to rule meant losing your dignitas. Losing your dignitas meant social death. So thousands of people watched in silence, while conquered women were dragged beneath the sands. Tacitus records one incident during Emperor Tiberius's reign. A senator named Marcus Valerius publicly questioned whether certain arena practices aligned with Roman virtues. Within a month, Marcus Valerius was accused of treason. His family was stripped of property. He died in exile. The message was clear: watch, cheer, or at minimum, stay silent. Juvenal captures this perfectly in his writings. He describes senators bringing their entire families to the games, including young daughters, exposing them to these horrors from childhood. It was socialization through spectacle, teaching the next generation that this was normal, acceptable, the price of empire. Suetonius mentions that Emperor Claudius once executed 3 citizens who left the arena during executions. Not because they protested, simply because leaving implied disapproval. Staying meant complicity. Leaving meant rebellion. The system trapped everyone. The gladiators were slaves with no choice. The prisoners were property with no rights. And the citizens were complicit witnesses, afraid to object. Martial writes about this paradox. In one epigram, he describes a father explaining to his son why a Dacian woman is being dragged away. She came from a people who resisted Rome. This is what happens to Rome's enemies. The child learns, the cycle continues, but not everyone stayed silent. History records moments when the facade cracked, when even Rome's brutality went too far for its own citizens. Cassius Dio documents an incident during Emperor Commodus's reign in 192 AD. Commodus, obsessed with gladiatorial combat, began personally selecting captivae as rewards for his favourite fighters. But he expanded the practice beyond prisoners of war. He started using daughters of political enemies, Roman citizens, treating them like conquered foreigners. One victim was the daughter of a senator named Quintus Pompeianus. She was a Roman citizen, protected by law, until Commodus decided otherwise. According to Dio, when guards came to take her, her father stood in the doorway. He was killed on the spot. She was dragged away anyway. That night, Rome's elite began plotting Commodus's assassination, not because of his tyranny in general, they'd tolerated that for years, but because he'd crossed the line between conquered